Dear Senator Babette, thank you for accepting to participate to our conference. You have been recently successful in your attempt to initiate a formal Senate inquiry into the excess deaths in Australia. Could you please elaborate on the excess mortality in Australia and the circumstances that led you to request a Senate investigation?
G'day, and thank you for your question. And of course, thank you for inviting me to contribute to this wonderful event. Look, I was first elected to the Senate in 2022. I was elected on the back of the Australian government's, frankly, draconian response to the COVID pandemic. As I'm sure you all know, we experienced some of the world's harshest lockdowns and, quite frankly, the most unscientific response that anyone could have ever imagined. Now, in the Australian Senate, I am just one of a few who are willing to challenge the government's actions. I've asked repeated questions and moved 5 separate motions in the Senate chamber on the higher than expected all-cause mortality. Now, this alarming phenomenon commenced back in 2021. In 2022, Australia experienced our highest excess level of death since World War II. It's the equivalent of a fully loaded jumbo jet crashing every week without any inquiry or adequate explanation. Australia saw record high excess mortality throughout the pandemic, peaking at 11.7% above the expected baseline in 2022. This number was initially touted to be as high as 15%. But the official government department, our Australian Bureau of Statistics, revised its excess death numbers down with the adoption of new modelling in 2023. Naturally, some of the excess deaths seen in Australia and around the world have been linked to COVID, but the virus cannot account for all of the excess mortality. In fact, the inconsistent criteria for linking deaths to COVID means that the impact of the virus on excess mortality is probably overestimated. In Australia, we initially separated deaths due to COVID alone and deaths with other causal factors. During the pandemic, this reporting method was changed, and all deaths with a causal sequence of events were moved into the due to COVID category, taking the accounting of deaths due to COVID from, I think it was about 8% to approximately 80%. Despite the biased reporting, not all excess deaths are from or with COVID, in fact, far from it. An analysis of 2022 excess mortality by Australia's peak actuarial body, the Actuaries Institute, who are responsible for reviewing data, allocated only half of Australia's 20,000 excess deaths to COVID. This leaves around 10,000 excess deaths in 2022 from other causes. The factors contributing to this excess are largely unexplained. While most of the excess deaths are in older age groups, excess mortality was at least 5% in all age groups in 2022. We know COVID wasn't really a threat to our youth, our young people, so why have they died in larger numbers than expected? A strong, healthy population is essential for a strong, healthy economy. The Australian government has failed in their duty to protect its citizens, and this is evident in the fact that they opposed all 5 of my motions. Now, of course, as you all know, this issue has been mirrored globally. Now, my World First inquiry will give a voice to many individuals and professional organisations, and I hope that this committee process gives a voice to the family members of the deceased and delivers the answers that our nation and the world so desperately needs.
You have been actively advocating for accountability of pharmaceutical companies for injuries. India requested accountability for injuries related to Pfizer's vaccine, but Pfizer declined to market its vaccine there. Could you please share your thoughts? with the audience of this conference about why a pharmaceutical company who advertises its product as 100% safe and effective should fear to be held accountable for vaccine-related injuries? Why it is so crucial, in your opinion, to hold Big Pharma responsible for vaccine-related injuries?
Thank you for your question, and that's a great question. Look, putting it simply, because their products are not 100% safe and they are not 100% effective. I applaud India for acting in the best interest of their citizens and their economy. I just wish that our country had done the same. The real question that we must ask is whether Big Pharma knew that their novel products may injure and may kill thousands of people around the world. Did they know? Australian evidence shows that adverse events following immunisation with the COVID-19 vaccines were reported at 23.8 times the rate per 100,000 doses of all other vaccines combined. Our health regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, last reported over 139,000 adverse events and over 1,000 deaths following COVID vaccination, and many experts believe that this is substantially underreported. Australia has a COVID vaccine injury compensation scheme, but I don't think that it is fit for purpose. The scheme acknowledges only a few select conditions. Each claim is taking just under a year to be processed, and the majority of claims are unfortunately rejected. Now, my response to all of this was to introduce a bill, which is another world first, which would prohibit the granting of indemnities to manufacturers of vaccines. In simple terms, it requires a pharmaceutical company to be liable for injury or harm caused by their product, rather than taxpayers paying for compensation to their victims. No more blank checks to Big Pharma. That's basically the gist of the bill. Now, our bill was referred to a Senate committee and received overwhelming public support. 97% of all submissions received supported the passage of my bill. Alarmingly, the Senate committee itself denied multiple senator requests for public hearings and recommended in their final report against the passage of my bill. The committee process revealed that in Australia, indemnity was granted by a public servant who to this day remains unknown. COVID-19 vaccine contracts in Australia remain hidden from public view due to appalling commercial in confidence provisions. The South African Pfizer contract was released following a High Court ruling. This contract is appalling and assigns all risks to the purchaser. We know that Pfizer also asked the South African government to put sovereign assets guaranteeing indemnity against the cost of any future legal cases up for grabs. Latin American countries were asked by Pfizer to put up federal bank reserves, embassy buildings, and even military bases as a guarantee against the cost of future legal cases stemming from adverse effects. Now, one needs to ask why a pharmaceutical company would request such significant collateral. We know that as early as 2006, pharmaceutical companies have been publicly demanding that manufacturers be granted protection from lawsuits associated with vaccine-related adverse events if they were going to participate in pandemic responses. This is a strong arm tactic by Big Pharma that some would say resembles collusion. Indemnification has created an incentive for risk-taking in the pharmaceutical industry, which is not aligned with the fundamental principles of medicine. Where indemnity exists, it is human nature to take larger and larger risks. Whether it is a conscious decision or a subconscious one, the outcomes are almost always poor. Now, I urge politicians around the world to follow my lead. Legislate against the granting of indemnity to ensure that history will never, ever repeat itself.
Considering all what happened in Australia during the pandemic, considering the strict lockdowns, the vaccination mandates, and the excess mortality that Australia is experiencing? Do you believe that some major mistakes have been made? And do you think it would be wise to give the WHO the authority to decide which medications and measures, such as vaccines and lockdowns, should be implemented in all nations, regardless of their healthcare systems, their economies, their location, and their cultures? Please.
I'm a senator for the state of Victoria, and my home state suffered through the world's longest lockdown. This is an experience that I and my family will never forget, and an experience that I hope is never repeated. Many mistakes have been made throughout the pandemic period. In Australia, we experienced lockdowns, border closures, vaccine mandates, and a real centralisation of government power. In my opinion, giving greater power to the WHO should be unthinkable. I believe that Australia must not only reject the proposed amendments to WHO international health regulations, we must exit the WHO entirely. Currently, proposed WHO amendments would give the World Health Organization virtually unlimited power, authority, and resources at the expense of national sovereignty and personal autonomy. My party, the United Australia Party, stood alone in educating the Australian public on the dangers of a WHO power grab prior to my election in 2022. Now, do you remember when the WHO attempted to investigate the origins of COVID? They sent their health officials to China in an embarrassing and theatrical performance for no result and no benefit. The WHO have proven themselves to be incompetent and power hungry. We can no longer blindly follow globalist authority. Changing the WHO from an advisory organization that merely makes recommendations to a governing body whose proclamations would be legally binding would be severely detrimental to member states. We must remember that failures cannot be pinned exclusively on the WHO. Our very own medicines regulator here in Australia, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, is 96% funded by Big Pharma. That's not right, and ensure doesn't promote objective decision making. I'm one of a few senators in Australia calling for a smaller, leaner government with an aim to repay government debt. Now, with the TGA, I am willing to make one exception. The TGA should be 100% taxpayer government funded to limit conflicts of interest and promote objective decision making. The way we approach public health must be reshaped. I urge the Italian government and governments all around the world to exit the WHO. If we exit the WHO, remove potential conflicts of interest, transparently release data, and force our key health decision makers to publicly justify their decisions, we can move towards a restoration of trust in health. But as long as we continue to blindly follow the WHO and sign bad deals with Big Pharma, public trust in health will continue to decline.
Thank you again for accepting to participate to our conference, and congratulations for your praiseworthy and courageous work.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at your event. I hope you all have a great day and that you can connect with like-minded people and that we can all together, all of us all across the world, make a difference to benefit our individual nations. Bye-bye.